Okay, so we are going to be discussing this concept application FRQ as a class for in-person students. So I wanted to give you virtual students the same opportunity to kind of practice and go over this type of concept application. So we've done some of these in previous units, but this one is the first one that's really going to give you a scenario to read, and then you're going to really try to answer the question with concepts from class. So my recommendation would be to just jot down the answers. You don't have to write this out. It's not going to be for a grade. Again, this is just practice. So I would, if I was you, read through the scenario, jot down the answers to A, B, and C, and then come back and watch the rest of this video where I'm going to explain how you could have answered this question. So again, this is just for practice. It is not a grade. But if you're taking the AP exam, I definitely recommend you looking over this type of FRQ, considering how you might answer it, and then compare your answers as I go through the rest of this video. So it says, beginning in the 1960s, the Supreme Court issued a series of rulings which apply constitutional protections to places where a person might have reasonable expectation of privacy, including areas outside of the home. As the internet developed, questions emerged about where internet communication takes place and the level of privacy protection email users can expect. In the case United States v. Microsoft from 2018, the federal government issued Microsoft Corporation a warrant to hand over to authorities email communications between some of its users. Federal law enforcement alleged that one of Microsoft's email users was operating an account to facilitate illegal drug trafficking. Microsoft refused to comply with the warrant, claiming that its servers were located in Ireland and thus not within the jurisdiction of the federal government. Before the Supreme Court decided the case, Congress intervened by passing the Cloud Act, which required internet-based companies to hand over communications requested in a warrant so long as both the federal government and the foreign government agreed. Microsoft and other internet companies accepted the new legislation, but the law raised concerns among many groups that civil liberties were being violated. All right, so here, that was the scenario that you were given, and then you have to respond to parts A, B, and C. So I'm going to go over now the possible answers to A, B, and C. So take a few minutes to jot this down and then come back and review the video to compare your answers. So for part A, it says referencing the scenarios, so what's above, describe the constitutional amendment that is most relevant to the Supreme Court case, and explain how the actions taken by the federal government prior to accessing emails illustrate the protection of a constitutional liberty. Okay, so for that first part, so referencing the scenario and that relevant Supreme Court case, so in this, your answer could be that the Fourth Amendment's limits on search and seizure, okay? So the Fourth Amendment is going to be most relevant, okay? So that's the first part. The second part, explain how the actions taken by the federal government prior to accessing emails illustrate the protection of a constitutional liberty. So in this scenario, the federal government is wanting to search Microsoft's servers, but Microsoft is refusing. And that is because the government needed to obtain that warrant showing probable cause in order to search the emails. Okay, so because of that Fourth Amendment, okay, the government is having to obtain a warrant before they can search. Okay, so that is an example of a protection of constitutional liberty. Okay, so protecting the privacy of individual citizens. So those are possible answers for part A. For part B, explain how passage of the Cloud Act reflects a tension between balancing order and liberty in the American system. So in this unit, we have talked about how the government's responsibility to provide social order and safety for citizens can sometimes seem to interfere with the civil liberties of citizens, okay? So it has to be a balancing act. So the government is going to have to keep citizens safe, but also not interfere with their civil liberties. So for this part, you could answer that the passage of the Cloud Act by Congress is going to expand the government's ability to access citizens' information, which reflects a prioritization of security over privacy. Okay, so in this example, that Cloud Act means that the government is trying to keep citizens secure. Okay, so they're prioritizing citizen safety over their privacy because that Cloud Act is going to give them that opportunity, okay, to require internet-based companies to hand over communications requested in that warrant so long as the federal government and foreign government agree. So in this example, they're putting security over privacy. All right, and then in task C, describe the selection of the Constitution, of the Constitution that grants Congress the power to pass the Cloud Act and explain how this power reflects the principle of checks and balances reflected in the scenario. So for the first part of Part C, the answer would be Article 1 of the Constitution. So it's in Article 1 of the Constitution that reflects all of the powers of Congress, gives Congress to pass legislation like the Cloud Act. Okay, so that would be the first part. The second part, okay, where you're having to explain how this power reflects the principle of checks and balances. So you have to consider how Congress passing the Cloud Act would be an example of a check of either the judicial branch or the executive branch. Okay, so for the judicial branch, it's reflecting a check because the court could have exercised judicial review had Congress not went ahead and passed that Cloud Act. Okay, so you see here that it was a case, but before the case decided, Congress intervened. Okay, so that would be the example of a check on the judicial branch. It would be a check on the executive branch because the congressional legislation is outlining the parameters for federal law enforcement to conduct a constitutional search and seizure of internet communications. Okay, so the executive branch has to carry out those laws passed by Congress. So this is a way that Congress is able to check the executive branch. So again, read through the scenario. After you've done that, go through, answer the questions, and then just compare what I just went through with your answers, okay, and how you could possibly answer this question. These questions can sometimes be a little bit difficult. We're going to do some more as we get further into the year, but I just wanted to give you an opportunity to kind of practice with this type of question before we do it for a grade.